Hi, I'm Mr. Thomasson. I teach English at Kings Mountain High School in Kings Mountain, North Carolina.
And I'm Ms. Morris, and I teach English at Redwood High School in Marin, California.
And I have a dog coming into my room to visit me. So we left off our last video, and I have a Great Dane that I'm petting to. We left off our last video with talking about what's a good source and what's not a good source. Mm-hmm. And we've made a list now of good sources. Now we're going to kind of walk our way through the process that we discussed at the beginning of the last video about who published it and that kind of thing for a couple of them, so you can kind of see how to work with them. And I think, Ms. Morris, you've already done one of them,
yep.
So we can kind of see what one looks like, right?
Yep. So I have the list now down from 14 sources to 8 sources that we decided were pretty reliable. Now, I may not end up using all of them, but just having a lot of options is a good thing. So the annotation format that I'm using is pretty basic. It starts with just the URL, which is the part that usually starts in www, and I just copy and pasted it there. And then after that, I'm going to put down the argument of the article. And that way I can remember later when I go back to write my paper what each source says without having to read it over and over. And I think before I did that, I always would have to read articles 5, 6, 10 times, and it was just such a waste of time that if you spend the 2 or 3 minutes it takes to do this now, it makes it a lot easier. And then I answered the question, is this a reliable source? So I went through kind of who wrote it, when was it written, when was it updated, are there ads, all the things we talked about in the last video. And then the last thing I did is, because I know I'm going to have to use quotes in my research paper, I took down a couple of things from the article that I thought would be useful in my argument, and I just copy and pasted them in. And in most cases that was like a whole paragraph. Now obviously I can't quote a whole paragraph in my research essay, but again, I wanted a little bit more information than I needed rather than less. So my first one...
So it's kind of like a note to yourself.
Exactly. Sure. And so the first one I did was the New York Times article, Texting May Be Taking a Toll on Teens. And what I said from the article was that the source is how texting may negatively affect teenagers' mental states. And the reliability, it's from the New York Times, published in May 2009. The author has a link to contact her. There are a few ads. The page is updated constantly, and the information is available for free without any additional software. I believe it's reliable because it meets the criteria in every area. Does that fit for you? Do you think that's an okay statement of reliability?
I think that's acceptable, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that does make it reliable, too.
And then I pulled this quote that was a specific example from the author, a friend of the author, I believe. He talked about his daughter, Raina, and how she had texted a lot, and then he took her phone away, and after she stopped texting, her grades went up significantly. So that's the example I pulled.
Okay, so how well do you think this article fits?
It doesn't talk about how it affects their reading and writing skills. It just says that kind of too much texting is a bad thing. So I guess it doesn't fit perfectly, does it?
No, not really. It sounds like that the article's only kind of tangentially related to your topic, maybe. There are things that are good sources that don't fit your argument, which is just as, not bad, but it's not something that you want to use, okay. Right?
Well, at least I know that for next time now. I won't have to write up another one that doesn't really fit.
Exactly.
So the next one is text messaging and its effects on teens' grammar. And this was the one that was the massive PDF. So this is text messaging and its effect on teens' grammar. So I'll start with the reliability since we've already talked that one out. There's no author listed at the top, but it does look like this was printed through the University of Alabama. So I'll copy that over.
And if that's the case, it's generally pretty reliable.
So it's from 2009. It has no ads, and it's from an EDU, no author information. But I could probably find that if I did a little searching.
Absolutely.
And it has lots of references at the bottom.
Always a positive thing.
So it's probably pretty reliable. Now, earlier I read through it and saw that the main argument they make is that there's lots of media sources like Fox News or CNN or even newspapers that kind of take the problem of teen texting out of proportion. So they talk about that a little bit, and then they give lots of survey data and also research data that says it's not as big of a problem as the media makes it out to be. So that's what I put for the argument, that there's actually evidence that literacy improves text messaging rather than makes it worse. And so what I would do,
Okay.
I guess what I would do next is find some quotes in here that I could use to support that. So I found a quote that says, one of the interviewees commented that the notion that students are having a problem with the use of formal versus informal language is not new. It is one that has been around before email came along, with students not knowing how to use I in a paper or third-person point of view. Instead, the interviewee noted, interestingly, that the problem with text messaging in association with grammar is the lack of depth in students' writing. So it's saying it's not text messaging that's the problem, it's not knowing what formal or informal language really is and not knowing how to code switch and use, whichever one is more appropriate to the genre. Do you think that's a good quote?
I think it is a good quote, and I think it fits pretty directly with one of your arguments. It's suggesting maybe that there is a problem with text messaging. How are you making the decision of what quotes to pull from there?
So what I'm doing is I'm scanning, and I'm looking for kind of numbers so that I find the statistics, because I know that my case is going to be built on, research. And so if it's research, there's got to be numbers and data. So that's one thing I'm looking for. I'm also looking for anything that's in quotation marks, which would indicate that it's an expert opinion, which is kind of, I saw that there was a person's name and her qualifications listed right before this quote. So I knew it was something that was coming from an expert. Are there any other strategies that I should be using to find good quotes?
Outside of actually reading the whole article instead of scanning it, in this initial stage, I mean, eventually, obviously, you're going to want to read the article, but in the initial stage, I think the things that you stated were perfectly fine places to start.
So then I'll leave that one there, and then, so I got my 2 annotations done. Let's assume that since I know how to do those 2, that I've gone through and done all of my 8. What would I do after I have all of them done?
Then it seems to me that you have about enough information to start making a decision about which side of the argument you're going to fall on, and that's going to kind of lead you to a thesis statement, right? Okay. Because remember, a couple videos ago we were talking about finding a question to ask, right? Mm-hmm. And this research that you have done is what how other people have answered the question, and now you're going to start using their arguments to build your own.
Okay. So I noticed that a lot of my sources are on the negative side, or on the text messaging has no negative effect on students. So do you think at this point I can say that's where I want to go?
I think that's a safe place to start. You might always find another piece of research that may contradict what you were finding earlier. So, but it seems to me that that's the direction that your research is headed, for sure.
Okay. So I think the next step is going to be to put my thesis statement together, but we better leave that for another video when it's not quite so late.
On the East Coast anyway, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you for helping me annotate my sources.
That's not a problem. That's what we're here for.
All right. I'll see you next time.
See you.